All right, I'm back with more gender and sexuality terms to discuss with you all. So I left off talking about sexual attraction and the difference between sexual attraction, sensual attraction, and romantic attraction, all of which are different ways in which we might find ourselves drawn to other people, whether sexual or non-sexual in some cases. They may be non-sexual. The way that we talk about and understand sex and sexuality in mainstream culture, the way that we're raised to think about it through our social institutions, is very limiting. Most of the time, we tend to think of sexual attraction as straight or gay, and that's all there is. Or I'm trying to think, I guess, like masculine or feminine. You're either attracted to masculine or feminine with no gray area in between. And most people don't fall tidily into those categories. Something I'll put in our next presentation is the Kinsey scale. Now, this is an older model of understanding sexuality, but it's still widely used in the literature today as a historic model for how we understand sex and sexuality. Kinsey theorized that we all fell into a spectrum between gay and straight, somewhere in the spectrum. So on the one end, you're completely gay, only attracted to same sex, or completely straight, only attracted to your opposite sex. And then we all kind of fall somewhere in the middle of that spectrum, was his theory. Very few people falling neatly and tidily into one of the categories. And that theory has been widely expanded now to say it's beyond even that spectrum to a much larger network or web of understanding of sex and sexuality. And again, I'll post some more visuals for that later. But what Kinsey was getting at, and what I think a lot of us kind of instinctually understand, is that it isn't that simple. And something that Bornstein's going to ask you to do is actually start thinking deeply about your own understanding of sex and sexuality and the things that you may or may not prefer. In the gender workbook, she spends an entire chapter talking about all of the different ways that we can explore and feel our own sex and sexuality and our own sex and sexual attraction. So that's a really important layer to add to our own understanding of our identities, as well as the identities of the people around us. That it's never wise to pigeonhole people into a singular category of understanding. That most people have much more complicated relationships with their own sex and gender than what we can understand with one or two clear-cut labels. So the next portion of the For Harriet article, the Beginner's Guide to Understanding Sex and Sexuality terms, is sexual orientation and romantic orientation. So the first couple of words here, aromantic and asexual, are people who don't experience sexual or romantic attraction, respectively. So that's something that's been largely left out of our cultural zeitgeist and our understanding of language. But there are people out there who don't experience either. Maybe you're one of those people. I don't know. It's not for me to know. But they've been largely left out of our understanding of sex and sexuality. But these people exist and their experiences are valid. And some people may even find shades of gray of asexuality and agender experience, where under certain circumstances they find themselves to be asexual, where in other circumstances they might not. That sexuality as well as gender can be very circumstantial, depending on the point you're at in your life, the relationship that you're currently in, or relationships that you're currently in. Some people have more sex and sexual experiences at certain parts of their lives than others. And that all can fit into our spectrum of sex and sexuality that we understand. Moving on, there's some additional language here around autosexual, biromantic. Autosexual simply meaning that you prefer to experience sexuality alone and without somebody else. So moving into biromantic and bisexual, largely these mean that people feel romantic feelings or sexual feelings for masculinity or femininity. They don't make a clear cut to say I'm only attracted to this experience and not that. Now, some folks have challenged bisexuality and biromanticism, saying that they don't identify as that because it's too reductive. The term bi implies that there's only two options, that you're either attracted to masculinity or attracted to femininity. And plenty of folks find that their bisexuality is more queer than that it falls somewhere in between masculinity and femininity. Maybe they find that they're more attracted to androgyny or queer, something kind of in between masculinity and femininity, or something completely outside of masculinity and femininity. So bisexuality and biromanticism are certainly valid experiences, but some folks have even expanded that out further to say that rather than being bisexual or biromantic, they're queer. Again, this is where we find that queer comes in really handy. Moving on, you can see there's a couple more terms here. I'm going to jump to the demi-romantic and demisexual. These are terms that I think a lot of folks find kind of comforting in knowing that it's not unusual to not feel a strong sexual bond with someone that you don't have another relationship with. So demisexuality implies that you have a strong sexual connection with someone you already have a deeper bond with. And the same goes for demi-romantic, that you don't feel romantic attraction until there's already more of an established connection. And I found that a lot of students kind of learn that word for the first time in this course and find that it helps explain maybe some of their own experiences with sex and sexuality. So I hope you find that one useful. I certainly have. We go on from the demi to the hetero and the homo, which, as they imply, heteroromantic implies that you experience romantic attraction to a gender different than yours, and heterosexual means that you experience sexual attraction to someone different than a gender different than your own. And then homoromantic and homosexual are the same but opposite, right? That it means you're largely romantically attracted to your same gender or sexually attracted to your same gender. Lithoromantic is another one, and lithosexual, which means that you might experience sexual attraction or sexual or romantic attraction, but you don't actually desire to have that acted on. That it's more of an innate experience rather than an external experience where you don't need others to reciprocate your feelings. The next term is going to be pan, so panromantic and pansexual. This is one that can kind of fall more tidily into that queer definition where there is no border around what you find romantic or sexual, but rather that it could be just about anything given the right circumstances. And I think that that one is kind of liberating as well. Moving on to poly, this means that you might be attracted to multiple genders, but not necessarily all genders. And same with polysexual, multiple genders, but not necessarily all genders. So in that one, again, like pansexual, polysexual can expand and include a lot more, depending on the circumstances, right? It's not attracted to everyone, but attracted to a wide variety of experiences, regardless of gender and sexuality, right? That, you know, you could be a straight woman who's attracted to gay men under certain circumstances. Because this sort of experience defies definition, which is why I think it falls really tidily within that queer umbrella. All right. Scolioromantic and scoliosexual are ones that I've sort of briefly alluded to, where these individuals might experience sexual or romantic attraction to people who don't neatly fit into a binary. So if you're more exclusively attracted to people who are queer or non-normative or non-conforming, that would be a nice tidy term for you to use. Okay, so we've talked about the relationships. Relationships can kind of fall into monogamous or polyamorous. Polygamous tends to have a negative connotation tied to religion, so it's not as widely used as polyamorous. This simply means probably what you already know it means. You're either interested in having a relationship with one person exclusively at a time, perhaps very long term, or you're more interested in having lots of relationships happening at the same time that are mutually beneficial, mutually reciprocated. This doesn't mean that you're someone necessarily who's having a lot of affairs or being dishonest, which I think is unfortunately something that gets tied with polyamory. It just means that you might have more than one relationship going on at a time, and most polyamorous circles encourage open communication and a strong bond to make sure that people are consenting and are fully aware of the type of relationship they're in. All of these terms imply, I hope, that consent is required. That's a non-negotiable in gender and sexuality studies. Sex without consent is rape under every single circumstance. So we're not going to even go into that with this language. These all imply that everyone is consenting. Okay. I'm at 10 minutes, so I'm going to stop here and I'm going to post one more video where we're going to talk about gender identity. So we've talked a lot about romantic relationships and sexuality, but let's move into gender next. See you in the next video.